The Raiders celebrate 65 years of Raiders football. So when did you become a member of Raider Nation? That plus more comes up on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for July 16th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thanks so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, if you're looking at us on YouTube, we appreciate that. Show grows each and every day, and that's because of the efforts of Raider Nation. And more importantly, the efforts of my man Ari does a great job each and every day, making sure we're on YouTube, we're looking good, we're sounding good. So like I said, we definitely appreciate what he puts into the show each and every day. You want to hit him up, be a part of it. At Ari Produces is the way to get him on Twitter. At your boy Q254, you can get me on Twitter. And if you want to be a part of the show, get your voice heard, 707-654-4693. That's the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Your calls and texts will come up in segment number 3. A lot of great feedback that we've had from many different subjects. We'll get that into the show as much as possible coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about 65 years Raiders football. They rolled out a new logo on Monday to commemorate the 65 years. And it's so funny. I remember when they were celebrating 60 years and all of a sudden, boom, 5 years goes by just like that. So we'll talk about 65 years of Raiders football and when you became a member of Raider Nation, when I became a member of Raider Nation. That all comes up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day as I always do. And I'll get right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. And training camp is coming up next week. Pretty excited about that. A couple teams are starting training camp this week, and the Cleveland Browns and the Houston Texans, as they're going to be playing in the Hall of Fame game. Also, the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. They'll have their rookies report pretty early this week, as they'll be playing that first week of the season, that Thursday night football season to kick the 2024 season off. So that's exciting to see teams report to camp, and the Raiders will be underway next week. So this time next week, this show that we call Locked On Raiders podcast will come to you live from Raiders training camp. So excited about that opportunity. The rookies don't report till the 21st. The veterans report on the 23rd, and then the first day of practice is on the 24th. But one piece of news that I found pretty significant on Monday was the fact that the Raiders are not going to be having any joint practices with any teams this year, which is really different compared to what they've always done in the past. They've always had at least one team that they've had joint practices against. And it's funny, myself and Vinny Bonsignore, as we do quite a bit, we talk a lot of football while we're at the facility, whether it's, mandatory minicamp, OTAs, rookie minicamp, whatever the case may be. And multiple times, Vinny has said, I wonder if the Raiders are going to scrimmage against anyone or have any joint practices, especially since they'll be in SoCal for a training camp down there in Costa Mesa. Of course, the Rams and Chargers are located there. Didn't think that they were going to go against them, but you never know. They've had joint practices against the Rams before and played them in the season. They've had joint practices against the Patriots before and played them in the season. So you never knew what could happen, but Adam Schefter tweeted out a schedule basically for all the teams across the National Football League on Monday that were going to actually be having joint practices. And one, I hadn't seen a schedule or a release like that before. I mean, all the years I've been covering the National Football League, I don't remember seeing this kind of a release. But then again, I always remember the Raiders going up and scrimmaging against, some team, and I know how much value they find in that, and teams in general find in going up against other teams. Matter of fact, the Rams, they're going to go up against many teams. The Rams will go up against the Chargers starting August 4th. Then they'll go up against the Cowboys on August 8th, and then they'll go against the Chargers again on August 14th, and then August 22nd, they'll go up against the Houston Texans. So they're going to be very busy throughout the course of training camp with joint practices. And again, I feel like teams and coaches, they get more value out of those joint practices than they do like preseason games. So not too sure what the exact reason is why the Raiders decided that they didn't want to do joint practice. I have a couple theories, but that's all they are. They're theories. They're not anything that is backed up by something I've been told by someone who's on the inside and knows. But one, I think with it being Antonio Pierce's first training camp as the full-fledged head coach, no interim tag, and this is his team. Maybe he just wants to make sure he's got his team under control as opposed to having his team under control and welcoming in another team or going to another venue and going up against them. I'm thinking that maybe that is part of it. And then also, they've got the quarterback competition. So maybe they just don't want anyone else to see what they've got going on as far as, training camp practices and all that. So there's multiple reasons, and neither one of those might be the reason. There's multiple reasons, though, why I think that, Antonio Pierce and company chose not to have any joint practices this year with anybody. Either way, doesn't really matter. I trust what Antonio Pierce, the rest of the coaching staff and the front office, what their decision is. It was just kind of strange to realize that they weren't going to have a joint practice because, again, like I mentioned, for multiple years now, going all the way back to, even since I've been here in Vegas, since 2021, they've always had joint practices. And even before that, when they were still in Oakland, they were having joint practices against other teams up in Napa. So just a surprise that they're not doing it. But, again, not questioning it, just bringing it to the table to let it be known that it's not going to happen. AP and the rest of the coaching staff and the front office decided they're going to work on themselves this year in training camp, and that's just fine. Speaking of AP working on themselves and the coaching staff choosing to do that, my guy Jordan Schultz, who's from Bleacher Report, does a heck of a job as an NFL insider. He was on The Herd with Colin Cowherd on Fox Sports. He's a regular contributor on that show, and they got into the conversation about Josh Jacobs and him deciding to leave the Raiders and go to Green Bay. And, there's some clip of him while he was on that podcast with Chris Long. He was on that podcast that I brought some sound to this show a long time ago from what Josh Jacobs had to say when it came to why, how he felt about not getting re-signed by the Raiders and what all went into him leaving the team. So there's been a clip going around about him talking about you guys are okay with losing, when I feel like that clip, first of all, is really being taken out of context, because he was talking about the first year he was in the league and the Raiders lost the game and he wasn't used to losing because he's coming from Alabama, and somebody told him, you're going to lose games in this league. And he was like, wait, you're okay with that? But that's him not wanting to lose. And that's him. I say it all the time. I'd rather have a guy on my team that hates losing more than he enjoys winning. And that's who Josh Jacobs is. He's a guy who hates losing more than he enjoys winning. And so that was something that was said in his first year in the league. But it feels like a lot of people are taking it as, oh, that's what he was saying about the Raiders in 2023. Oh, you guys are okay with losing, that's why I'm leaving, when that wasn't the case. If you want the evidence of that, just go back to Chris Long's podcast that he had Josh Jacobs on it and actually listen to the whole thing, not just a clip that some folks are getting, some content creators are getting just to kind of push their narrative. But they started talking about that, right? That little clip, and talk about Josh Jacobs leaving the Raiders and headed to Green Bay. And, Josh had brought up how Max and Devontae and himself were really advocating for Antonio Pierce to be that head coach and take that interim tag off. And so here's what Jordan Schultz had to say about the direction that the team is going under AP, what he learned by talking to multiple people inside that Raiders locker room.
If you ask anybody, and I asked quite a few guys last year in that locker room, what the difference was from Josh McDaniels to Antonio Pierce, night and day. Yeah. And the fact that he just mentioned Crosby and Tay. Crosby and Adam, those were the two guys that vouched the most for Pierce. And that says everything I need to know about why they ultimately kept Antonio Pierce, made him from interim to head coach. Now, he has to win, and we talked about the deficiencies of quarterback potentially with Minshew or AOC. But, Colin, the Raiders finally feel, at least from a coaching standpoint, like a professional organization, and that's going to matter. Quickly, one conversation I had with Justin Tuck, who played with Pierce with the Giants, and he told me that he knew Pierce would be a successful head coach at the NFL level because of how he relates to players. He was always a natural leader. To your point, you got to have some X's and O's, but I think that at least matters.
You can get a lot of those X's and O's from staff.
Jordan Schultz right there from Bleacher Report. He's been around a long time, covering the NFL, covering the NBA. Big-time NFL insider actually sent me that clip, sent me a text. It was like, hey, just FYI. And I'm like, man, good looking out, right? He always tries to send me anything that has to do Raider-related, and definitely appreciate that. And, I think everything that he said there was spot on. Obviously, the biggest goal is winning games. AP is going to have to win games, but I've said it before. I feel like that this team is definitely headed in the right direction. He's got the pulse of the fan base. He's got the pulse of the locker room. He knows about the Raiders way, and he's trying to restore that and bring back that commitment to excellence. And he's trying to make just win, baby, actually mean something instead of just a slogan on a T-shirt. He's trying to get back to what the late, great Al Davis thought about when he was talking about commitment to excellence, when he was talking about the greatness of the Raiders are in their future, just win, baby. Everything that Al Davis said, everything he put out there, that's what AP is trying to bring back. Again, ultimately, it doesn't matter if you don't win games. You have to win games, and he knows that. He ain't no dummy. He was born at night, not last night. So it's all about wins and losses in the National Football League. And starting next week, AP will start putting together his team for 2024 as he attempts to do just that, which is win a lot of games and get an opportunity to get into the playoffs. So that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Little news and notes collected. Coming up in segment number 2, 65 years of Raiders football. So when did you become a member of Raider Nation? When did I become a member of Raider Nation? And what are the Raiders in general doing to celebrate 65 years? All that will come up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to let you know that today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast is brought to you and also part by BetterHelp. And I've said it multiple times that I got back not too long ago from a very much needed vacation, a little bit of stepping away from sports, stepping away from radio, stepping away from podcasts, and just having the time to be able to decompress and get ready to go full throttle. And full throttle begins next week. So I had that opportunity to kind of clear my mind and think about things that I had to, really kind of put in perspective and get myself in a good position. And that was very much needed. And a lot of people need that. And everyone doesn't really quite get that opportunity all the time. Sometimes you're tasked with having to come up with a decision quick, fast, in a hurry, and a decision that could be way bigger than what guests are coming up on your radio show or what are you going to talk about on the podcast, but really life-changing decisions. Well, that's where BetterHelp can help you. They offer opportunities at therapy that best fits you entirely online. They're convenient. They're able to be flexible and fit with your schedule. All you got to do is fill out a quick questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and if you need to switch a therapist at any time, you can at no additional charge. Talk with someone that has no agenda on your life. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about 65 years of Raiders football. And, things just happen in such a coincidence, right? We talked on Monday's show about the Raiders trying to continue to build the fan base in Las Vegas. Talked about it was already established in Oakland and Los Angeles and, of course, worldwide. There was no work that needed to be done there, but the fan base still needed to be built up here in Las Vegas. I had no idea, no joke, I had no idea that later on Monday that there was going to be a notice sent out and a big write-up on Raiders.com about 65 years of Raiders football and a new logo that they actually rolled out and displayed on Raiders.com. And I do encourage you to go check it out if you're following the Raiders on any kind of social media. They put it out there as well and put a little bit of a write-up. But celebrating 65 years of Raiders football is what it says. It's a big Raiders shield if you have not seen it, with the crossing swords right there in the middle of the logo, and it says LXV. The L is on the left side, the X is in the middle, and the V on the right side. And it says the LX pays tribute to 60 years in Oakland, LA. V signifies the 5 years the Raiders are called Vegas home. So 1960 to 2024. And it's so funny. As I'm reading this, I was thinking, man, I remember when the Raiders first got that 60-year patch on their jersey. Remember when they were celebrating the 60 years of Raider football? 5 years went by just like that. Pretty incredible, man. Went by quick, fast, and in a hurry, and they are on to another chapter in Raider football. And again, it's so funny in the history of Raider football, we just talked about this on Monday. And again, I had no idea, and I swear on everything I love, that was going to roll out later on Monday afternoon, but it did. And so on their write-up, they said, as the Raiders commemorate their 65th season, the logo stands as a testament to resilience and tradition in the world of professional sports. Since their inception in 1960, the Raiders have carved out a storied legacy, becoming synonymous with passion, grit, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Over the decades, the Silver and Black has thrilled fans with countless memorable moments, from historic victories to iconic plays to 3 Super Bowl championships that have left an indelible mark on the sport. Beyond the gridiron, the Raiders have fostered a tight-knit community, uniting fans from all walks of life under the banner of Raider Nation. So there you go, 65 years of Raider football. But it got me thinking when I saw that, wow, 65 years. I know there's some folks that listen to this show that have been fans all 65 years. I am not one of them, right? I mean, I was a fan growing up in the Bay Area, and I told this story on my radio show on Monday. Growing up in the Bay Area, I was always a fan of the Raiders, but from a distance. Because when I really locked in and I really started paying attention to the Raiders, they were in L.A., and I was in the Bay. And no disrespect to L.A., I say it all the time. Got a lot of love for L.A., but I was a Bay cat, right? And so I live by my Bay rules. So everything in the Bay is what really mattered. So I had a lot of friends that were choosing to be 49er fans. And actually, there was a lot of folks in the Bay that were Raider fans that when the Raiders left, they all of a sudden became Niner fans because the Niners were still in the Bay. Now, I wasn't going to do that, but I did watch the Raiders from a distance. I was the guy that, they would tell me at church, hey, man, go outside and listen in your dad's car for the score of the game real quick. All right, cool. I'd be the runner, right? I'd be the guy that went and did that. But in 95, when the Raiders returned to Oakland, it all changed because now they were in Oakland. They were back where they belonged as far as I was concerned. Again, remember being a Bay Cat, right? It was all about the Coliseum. I say it all the time. I'm an A's fan. I'm a Warriors fan. I'm a Raiders fan. They all played in the same parking lot. Now none of them play in the same parking lot, but you understand what's going on. So, in 95, that's when I locked in. That's when I became, okay, this is what it is. It's Raider Nation or nothing, right? I mean, again, watching the Raiders from a distance while they were in L.A., that was awesome. Love to hear them win games. Love to watch them. My dad and myself used to watch the games after church, or we'd do whatever it takes to be able to hear the game, get it on the radio, whatever the case may be. But until they returned in 95, it was just like, okay, that's cool. That's a cool team. I really like them. When they returned in 95, it was let's go, full throttle, right? Hair on fire. It's Raider Nation, silver and black all day. And then starting to, have those celebrations at the Coliseum and being back at the Coliseum for tailgate parties and, seeing Raider Nation all gather. And like the Raiders said that, they've been uniting fans from all walks of life under the banner of Raider Nation. That was my exact definition, basically, when I would go to the Coliseum and I would look around and smell the barbecue, smell Oakland, smell everything that was in the air, from the sticky icky to everything else, right? Just being able to be in that environment. But you look around and there was Raider Nation from everywhere. It didn't matter what you looked like. Didn't matter what you sounded like. Didn't matter where you lived, what your religion was, what your politics were, what your sex was, what your tax bracket, whichever one identified you. It did not matter. As long as you were rocking that silver and black, you were yelling out Raiders. You were, going across that bridge and representing. None of that mattered. It was 65,000 family members. Like I used to tell everyone, if you ever go anywhere in Oakland and get in a fight, go to the Coliseum during the Raider game. As long as you got that silver and black on, you got 65,000 folks that got your back, right? And that was the honest to God truth. And so that was part of the maturation of my fandom. So I could imagine that starting in I wasn't born until 76, so obviously I didn't have a shot until at least the early 80s. But I was watching the games. My parents were big sports fans, so of course they were always watching the games and kind of educating me along the way. But when I really stepped out and drew that line in the sand where it's Raider Nation or nothing was 95 when they returned to Oakland. And that was just, again, to me was incredible. It was awesome. Obviously, they're on to their next chapter now here in Las Vegas, and I never think that anything's going to be exactly like Oakland. I'm sure folks in L.A. think it's never going to be like anything in L.A., and I have to admit, I never saw a game in L.A. I never went to the L.A. Coliseum. I'm sure it was awesome. I'm sure it was incredible. I'm sure the tailgates were amazing, but I never experienced them. Only tailgates I experienced for the Raiders were either in Oakland or on the road somewhere, right, at a road game. But, of course, at the Coliseum, it was second to none as far as I was concerned from my experiences. But 95 was what it was for me. The juice and the energy around the Bay was incredible. I still remember that first game. Celebrities like Magic Johnson were on the sidelines, and I just remember just how excited everyone was. I even remember working at the grocery store, and that first game, they're like, hey, if you want to wear Raider jerseys to work that day, you can. I was like, word? That's what's up. Raider jersey for sure, right? I mean, they had special days and everything, and just all the different pageantry that they had at the stores, and all the guys that were standing on the side that were selling stuff, bootleg stuff on the bridge or on Hegenberger Road on the way to the Coliseum, or right there, by Denny's and everything. Like there was some bootleg stuff. It was just so much energy and juice around the Bay that it was a time to celebrate. Radio stations were having a great time. They knew they were going to start representing. So for me, I got locked in. And like I said, even with my friends that were Niner fans, and I had plenty of friends that were Niner fans, I drew my line in the sand and told them, all right, man, y'all go do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to ride with these East Bay cats because that's who I am. I'm an East Bay dude, and I'm all about these Oakland Raiders, and that's what it's always been. So for me, now at 47 years old, it all really came full circle for me in 95. And I know that there's some that have stories that go way back and probably more creative stories and reasons why. Maybe it was a certain play. A lot of people hitting me up and said that 83 Super Bowl when they saw Marcus Allen in that incredible run against Washington, that did it for them. Some had family members that were like, it's Raiders or nothing. And that's what, Little Q would tell you right now. If he had to say when his Raider fandom started, it was when he came out the womb. He didn't have no option, right? For me, it was Raiders or nothing. I told him, hey, man, and I can't say it's now because he's grown and I'm old, but I was like, hey, man, I'm young enough. I can create another one of you if you don't pick the right side. So he always knew, but it was always a great time going to the games with both my boys, right? Just giving them that experience and kind of, putting the Raider Nation in their heart and in their minds early on. And so I think I did a good job of brainwashing them. Now the Raiders need to step their game up and actually, show its worth and win. So Little Q knows that, okay, this is what my dad was talking about many, many moons ago when I was first born, and he gave me basically no options. It was Raiders or nothing. But that's just how it kind of happens. For me, like I said, it wasn't Raiders or nothing. I didn't get that ultimatum put on me, but in 95, it was a no-brainer when they made their return to the Coliseum. So what was it for you? When did your fandom begin? When did you become a member of Raider Nation? And is there a story behind it that got you where you are today? Let us know about it. 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts are coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball. It makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. Monday was the Home Run Derby in Arlington, Texas. It was incredible, a hell of a show. It was 3 hours long, but it was a hell of a show. It was fun to watch. So that means what? Today is the All-Star game. So maybe if you all of a sudden got a wild hair up your backside and decide that you want to go to the game, well, guess what? Gametime can help you get there. They've got great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, their lowest price guaranteed. Gametime will take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. So if you want to be up close and personal and see all the All-Stars from the AL and the NL, Gametime is the way to make it happen. And, all you got to do is be in the Arlington area, and you can do it. I actually have a buddy that works at a radio station in East Texas that is right there in Dallas because he's at SEC Media Days at the Omni in Dallas, which is not too far. So I told him when I had him on my radio show, like, hey, man, you're not going to make a trip up to Arlington real quick and go to the game? He's like, nah, man, I'm going to get there on Wednesday. I was like, Wednesday? The festivities will be open. But that are over. That's not you, though. You don't have to wait till Wednesday to miss the festivities. You can actually go and check them out right now. All you got to do is take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create the account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's all one word, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start off with a text from George in the STL. That's St. Louis. He says, Q, bottom line up front. I see the Raiders easily landing their quarterback next year in the draft. I see 7 teams in the NFL potentially needing to draft a quarterback as of today. Giants, Titans, Saints, Buccaneers, Seahawks, Cardinals, Rams. Saints and Buccaneers might win the division and stick with their quarterback. Then there's 6 teams. I would have put the Jets in there, but they drafted Jordan Travis in the 5th round, which is a steal. The Raiders should have picked him. If the Raiders do better or worse than those teams, I trust Tom Telesco to find a quarterback easily. As George in the STL, the Jack Tatum Raiders. So thanks for the text. I appreciate you. So, okay, the teams, you're saying Giants. So Daniel Jones is out. Titans, Will Levis is there. I don't think that they're going to address the quarterback position anytime soon. The Saints have Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler, depending on how you feel about Rattler. Buccaneers have Baker Mayfield. I think he's going to stick around for a while. Seahawks, I agree. They have 2 quarterbacks there that I feel like are really bridge quarterbacks. The Cardinals, I don't think they're giving up on Kyler Murray anytime soon. And the Rams have Matt Stafford right now. But I can see what you're talking about as far as maybe getting a quarterback in there that they can groom to be the next guy. Look, the thing about it is there's always going to be teams that need quarterbacks, right? The Raiders might find that they have their quarterback this year. Aiden O'Connell might step up and be that guy. Gardner Minshew might ball out, and they say, you know what, we got this guy for the next – let's make sure he's around for the next 3 or 4 years. Like, we don't know. We'll start to find out next week when when training camp opens up. But there's always going to be teams, as far as I'm concerned, that are going to need quarterbacks, and so we'll see what happens. Right now, all I'm really worried about is not really the draft for next year. I'm worried about the Raiders putting it together for this year, right? I think that this team should be better than they were last year because they don't have the chaos going on around them. So it's really going to be up to the quarterbacks to get good, consistent quarterback play. And it's funny. I talked about it on Friday's show about the Browns, and we talk about teams that had just average quarterback play that made the playoffs. We don't have to go that far back. We can go to the Cleveland Browns, and I realize their defense was phenomenal, but I'm expecting the Raiders' defense to be phenomenal as well. They had 5 different quarterbacks, and they made the playoffs. 5. Now, their ugly quarterback play came to really hurt them in the end when they went up against the Texans in the playoffs, but this is a team that made the playoffs with 5 different quarterbacks. So there's no way to tell me right now that the Raiders can't find a way to make the playoffs if that team can make the playoffs with 5 different quarterbacks. The Raiders could do it as well. They've just got to figure it out, and it all starts next week. George, thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Easy E Raider. He's calling to talk about the reason that he's fired up and how Antonio Pierce motivates him. Here he is, Easy E Raider.
Hey, Q. This is Easy E calling from Los Angeles. Yeah, I just wanted to say I am so excited about Antonio Pierce. I've been listening I listen to you every day because you motivate me. And Antonio Pierce motivates me too. As a musician, I'm a bass player. I practice every day, because I get hyped from just listening to you and the things that Antonio Pierce is doing for the Raiders. And I just want to say, when Travis Kelce said what he said about the Raiders, they came to fight, that speaks volumes. And I think, the way that, I forgot who that was, but somebody on the Raiders was mad when they lost the first game. And I think that means something. If you make it to the NFL, you should believe that you are the best in the world. And I think it's just a matter of having the right coach, pushing the right buttons, and to make you better. So I think we're going to be all right. I don't know nothing about football. I'm just a fan. I can't tell them what to do, but I love it, and I'm motivated, and I think Antonio is a great motivator. So let's go, Raiders. We're going to be all right.
Easy E, thanks for the call. Appreciate you. You got me fired up now, man. I want to put some pads on and hit someone. The only problem is, if I put some pads on and hit someone, I'm going to end up being on the wrong end of that hit, right? That's how I felt on November 1st when AP and Champ Kelly were introduced to the media as the interim GM and the interim head coach. After AP talked, I was like, man, I remember going back to do my radio show. I'm like, man, I'm fired up. I want to run through a wall, or at least attempt to run through a wall. And then I realized that wall was going to win. I'm not going to be that guy. So, AP does a fantastic job of motivating people. He inspires people. He gets them fired up. There's a reason why the team wanted to bring him back as the head coach, not the interim, because he does just that. Right now, ultimately, you heard Jordan Schultz in segment number 1 talk about it's all going to boil down to wins and losses. He's absolutely right, and that's just a no-brainer. But he puts his team in the best position to succeed by having them at least fired up and ready to go. Like, the one thing I don't think we'll talk about in 2024, and I'll be highly disappointed if we do, is a Raiders team that goes out and performs and takes an L and they look like they had no desire to even play, right? I mean, I go back to, what game was it? New Orleans a couple seasons ago, where there was basically a no-show. And then last year against Chicago, where it was basically like a what the blank just happened there, right? I mean, there's games that you could point out and say, what was that? Right? I mean, I just don't think that he'll ever be in a position where the team doesn't show up. And I know before you say, well, what about the Vikings game coming out of the bye week where the Raiders lost 3-0? Yeah, the offense didn't look good, but the team kept the Raiders, the defense kept the Raiders in the game by only allowing the Vikings 3 points. So the defense was ready to play. It's just the offense was a no-show. So I don't even put that completely on AP. I just put that on that was an awful day to have an awful day where they only lose by 3 points and the defense played a hell of a game. If it wasn't for a turnover early or late in the game, then who knows if Minnesota ever even really scores, or if the Raiders lose that game. I thought the Raiders were in position to go score, but that Hunter Renfrow fumble did them in as far as I'm concerned. But a really good call, man, and I'm glad that I can help, get you fired up as well, man. I definitely appreciate that. Appreciate that comment. Up next, a text from Air Raid Vic in the 757 says, Q, been listening to a lot of comparisons between O'Connell and everyone from Tom Brady to Brock Purdy. Has there been any conversations comparing him to Kurt Warner? I'm not saying O'Connell deserves a gold jacket, but they have similarities from a physical tools perspective. Finally, will Kurt Warner's skills still be effective in today's game with more mobile quarterbacks? Trying to be positive about the Raiders' 25 season. Let's go, Raiders. That's Air Raid Vic in the 757. And, yeah, I didn't think about Kurt Warner. I don't know. I mean, Kurt Warner had really good arm talent. Obviously, he was in a fantastic system right there. The greatest show on turf, obviously. He fit that team very well and that offensive scheme very well. I'm not sure if you could compare Aiden O'Connell's skill set to Kurt Warner's. Aiden O'Connell, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not putting the Tom Brady comps. I'm not putting the Brock Purdy comps. Not putting the Kurt Warner. I just think that Aiden O'Connell's Aiden O'Connell, right? He's a guy that has good arm strength. He has good accuracy. He's not mobile, and he's pretty smart. He's got it between the ears. So he could figure this thing out, right? Again, I'm not saying he's ever going to be an elite quarterback. That's fine. Clearly, the league only has a handful of elite quarterbacks, and we can't even all agree on who's elite and who's not. But he's, I think, good enough to get the job done, especially with the strength of the Raiders' defense. Like, it's the football. The good thing about this game is that it's the ultimate team sport. You literally need the offense to do his job, the defense to do his job, special teams to do his job, and every once in a while you need a good bounce or two, right? A little bit of lady luck on your side as far as like injuries go, and like I mentioned, a bounce or two create some turnovers. So, I just think Aiden O'Connell's kind of in a category of his own. Gardner Minshew, same thing. He's kind of a different dude, a little bit of a journeyman quarterback, kind of know who he is. But if the Raiders have a long-term solution at the quarterback position, I would think, just for my money, it would be Aiden O'Connell as opposed to Gardner Minshew. But we'll see. And the good thing about it is we'll see as early as next week. So that, to me, is exciting. We'll get one more call in. This goes from Harrison from Austin, Texas. Quick call from him. He's calling to ask about the Netflix special receiver and a question about a certain game being kept out of it and why that was. Here he is, Harrison from Austin, Texas.
Q. What up, man? This is Harrison out of Austin, Texas. I'm just calling to ask about the receiver special, the Netflix documentary about Devontae. I was looking through, and I was really looking forward to seeing the Kansas City game, and it wasn't on there. So I'm wondering why they cut it short. Is it because Patrick Mahomes is an executive producer on the show, or is it just because Devontae didn't have, the game that he had the previous game? So let me know what you think. All right, Q. Go Raiders!
Harrison, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you, my man. And, I've had multiple people ask me about that Christmas game victory over the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City when the Raiders go in there and pull off the upset. And, I'm sure there's multiple reasons. Patrick Mahomes being an executive producer might have a little something to do with it. But honestly, I think the biggest reason is the Raiders had an awful day passing the ball, right? So, Aiden O'Connell threw for 62 yards. 62. That's all he threw for, right? And so that's not going to get it done ever, right? That's why when people lean in on that game and say, see, the Raiders could beat the Chiefs consistently, or Aiden O'Connell could do it. Look what he did on Christmas. He threw for 62 yards, right? Zamir White went over 100 yards on the ground, which is phenomenal. That was good. The Raiders needed that for multiple reasons, including the play that salted the game away where they were able to go into victory formation, but ultimately on the strength of the defense that scored 12 points, right? They were responsible for 12 points. That's the reason why the Raiders won, is because of the defensive touchdowns. As far as Devontae in that game, like I said, O'Connell only threw for 62 yards. Jacoby Myers had 42 of those yards. Devontae, one catch for 4 yards. So if I'm Devontae, I'd be like, yeah, you don't have to put that game on this show. There's nothing to get excited about. One catch, 4 yards, nothing to get fired up about. So I'm sure that was the biggest reason why it was not in full display or on display at all in that Netflix special receiver. So that's all I got time for on today's show. I got a text from the 206. Bad Luck Raider in the 559. Hit us with a call. We'll get that coming up on tomorrow's show. We'll have more news and notes, and we'll talk about Boomer Esiason. I thought about doing it today, but I didn't. I decided not to. I'll wait till tomorrow. Boomer Esiason does radio in New York, and of course, based off the receiver Netflix special, he's speculating about Devontae Adams and where he'll play in 2024, to the point where he's talking about he believes if Devontae gets traded, it's going to be early August or late August and early September, which, well, That's a whole nother conversation. But we'll hear what Boomer has to say. We'll discuss it. We'll break it down. We'll do that unless something real big rolls out today, and then we have to just punt on it and we talk about it another day. But that's the plan. News and notes. What Boomer Esiason on New York radio had to say about Devontae Adams and his future, and, of course, calls and texts. That's what I'm expecting coming up on Wednesday's edition. Already Wednesday, huh? Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Again, thanks so much for making the Locked On Raiders podcast your first listen every day. We do appreciate that. If you want to get caught up on all the other teams on the Raiders schedule or just across the National Football League, make sure to tune in to all of our other shows that we have on the Locked On Podcast Network. We have all 32 teams represented, and we have over 200 total shows across the network, different sports, college football, basketball, Major League Baseball, hockey, even draft shows, WNBA. Everything is covered like a glove. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So until Wednesday, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.